enhance supply response. I know Australian farmers are kind of at the pinnacle of supply response and ability to shift between uses, and many of the studies I've seen presented here show a lot of flexibility. Much of the world doesn't share that, and foreign assistance and other things that could enhance the ability of farmers to adjust to these circumstances would be great. Finally, the perfect storms, well, I think we're unlikely to see a perfect storm globally because of the productivity track record in agriculture, among other things. On a local basis, we are likely to see, I think, very strong pressure on land use. And we're already seeing it in many parts of the world, land and water use. We're seeing it here in Australia on the water side. So we need spatial resolution in the global analyses. So the Minnesota IFPRI Harvest Choice Project really is at the frontier of that. I think that's very important. It's great that Gates is ponying up for that and funding that work. I've been involved, was asked by the UK government to write a proposal for a spatially explicit global time series database infrastructure for long-run analysis of global land use. And we're moving ahead with a workshop on that in May. And this is designed really just to network the people already doing this great work out there, but unfortunately doing it to different specifications, so they can't use one another's stuff. A lot of heavy lifting going on there. Kind of reminds me of the pre-GTAP days with the trade modeling. A lot of heavy lifting going on to generate data sets that are incompatible, and too much work being spent on generating new and somewhat inferior databases in many cases. So important area for societies like this to push to the extent we have clout with the funding agencies to push in that direction. Closing with a movie, another movie. I love these things that Naveen produces. This is 300 years of land cover change. And so watch Australia if you want, although not much is going to happen. These are pixel intensities of cropland. Red means a lot of intensity. We're moving up to 1900, and you can see by that point, Eastern US, pretty intense. Western Europe, very intense. South Asia, the intensity of cropland cultivation, very high, as well as in northeastern China. Let's go the next 50 years, and you might keep your eye on the southern hemisphere, Brazil or Australia, moving up to 1950, we begin to see much more action in Brazil. When we go forward, the last 50 years, you really start to see the action around the Amazon that people have become concerned with, also in Africa. So this is the kind of thing that we need to be, as economists, we need to be able to do more of this cool spatial stuff. The IFPRI Minnesota guys are really pioneering that, but I think we want to be in a position where we can bring this kind of spatial resolution to bear on this important issue, and on a global scale. I think that's the future of analysis of land use and environmental issues in the long run. So there's an extensive bibliography, and this is in the paper on the website, and that wraps it up.
I'm going to use my privilege as chairman and ask a question, because it's something that's always part of the privilege, is there seems to be a lot of evidence that these not doesn't say much in the way of greenhouse gas emissions. It raises the question, how can we profitable any oil price if it's burning as much energy as
Okay, I wasn't talking about the energy balance. The energy balance is, sorry. Okay, so John's asking a question about the energy balance for ethanol, and over time there's been a lot of controversy about that, but there's a paper published a couple of years ago by Farrell et al., Berkeley group, on the energy balance, and that's turned positive with improvements in inefficiency of conversion and so on. So the question, how can you possibly, how can ethanol be profitable at any price? Well, we see that. We're right about at the point where, around us, for example, when the oil price dropped from its peak, you saw a bunch of ethanol plants mothballed. Oil prices are rising, they're coming back in.
So they're using gas as the input? Is that what they're
well, I mean, in Indiana, they'll be using coal. coal-fired power, but which makes it even worse for the environment. But they're not doing the environmental calculation. They're just doing the profit calculation, and they're not having to bear it. Yeah.
Okay, so, Mark.
Michael, Aares, University of Sydney. I really enjoyed the talk. It's very informative and full of lots of food for thought. But the two things I guess my scientist colleagues might question when they sort of ponder, doomsaying scenarios. One is the mining of the topsoil, so soil loss, and the other is resources to make fertilisers with. So we're facing those margins as well, and you didn't mention either of those.
Great. Good point. Well, unfortunately, I just sat in on a presentation on soil carbon, 2 of them, and they really highlighted the great uncertainty associated with the economic incentives associated with soil carbon and how that interacts with profitable practices and so on. But clearly, very important. That's an area where, it seems like we're just beginning to make headway in a way that it can be incorporated in economic models. To the extent that we're mining limited resources to produce the fertilizer. Think about the fertilizer as being embedded with the land in that relatively limited factor, and it's other stuff you're substituting for those. So it's a very simple framework that I've laid out here. Realistically, you'd want to put the water into the land for a full accounting, and potentially some of the fertilizers that couldn't be readily produced. But if you're producing fertilizer from natural gas has become hugely abundant recently. So the main point is that there are things out there available from the rest of the economy as agriculture becomes smaller relative to the rest of the economy, and we really don't influence those prices. And effectively, you've got a perfectly elastic supply of labor, capital, whatever, maybe natural gas to produce fertilizer to substitute for this scarce resource.
Gordon McCauley there. Tom, fantastic presentation. Thanks very much. A while ago, I read a little bit in FAO and land use. And one of the things that just comes to mind was that there's a very, very large area of dry land, rain-fed areas still available for development. Clearly there's a biodiversity trade-off, development trade-offs and so on. But how is your thinking about that the argument that we still have quite a lot of land available for agricultural development really, really needed?
Right. I want to go to this slide. And there's a great book, Hans Binswanger, among others, publication from the World Bank, Sleeping Giant, okay? And it's talking about this area with a big circle over it in southern Africa. They have done a detailed comparison with the Cerrado in Brazil and with areas in Thailand that went through a similar period, had been largely fallow, and then through various innovations as well as significant investments, they were able to bring that in very productively, say in the case of Brazil. Although, let me underscore, the investments are significant to bring the Cerrado into production. So, the first question is, this is what in the biofuel debate they say all the time. Oh, well, don't worry, we're not going to use that cropland. We're going to use this land over here that no one's using. Well, that's not the way it works. The farmers go and use the land that's where it makes the most sense for them. And there's a reason they're not using that land over there. It may cost several $1,000s per hectare to improve it to that point. So it's an economic issue. Why are the yields so low here? Poor access to markets. Really, the way I would think about it is, or respond to Binswanger, for example, well, great that the resource is there. It's like oil down at some amazing depth. It's there, but we aren't able to access it. This land is there, but the institutions, the infrastructure aren't there to access. It's not part of the global economy. So clearly the supply side, also an important element of the supply side, is the potential to bring these lands into production. Good point.
Tom, can I ask a question about food wastage? In the sense that there's enormous food wastage in developing countries. One imagines technology will get on top of that. And then in developed countries, will we, with higher food prices, be less wasteful than we are
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing, at least in the U.S., it's amazing how unresponsive we are in our consumption behavior to these commodity price spikes. Part of it is that the agricultural product is such a small part, and that's what I'm interested in here, is the agricultural, the farm level demand elasticity in some sense, is such a small component of the final price that people really don't pay much attention to that, the actual farm product itself, and the price elasticity demand is very low. But so it's hard for me to see, even with a doubling of farm prices in the U.S., a great conservation either through wastage or reduced consumption in food. In developing countries, the price elasticity demand is much higher, and that's indicative of the fact they're much more sensitive to this. And there, the wastage is really more a marketing system, not consumption. So it's something to think about. I don't really have anything profound to say about it.
We might wrap it up there because we're out of time. We have a few more things to cover. So, round of applause for Tom.